The sun had no mercy that day. It hung over the Arizona territory like a branding iron pressed flat against the sky, and every rock, every grain of sand, every bleached bone along the trail threw the heat back up at you twice as hard. My canteen was half empty. My horse, Cinder, was moving slow, and I was 3 days out from the nearest town with nothing but dry wind and silence for company. My name is Caleb Holt. I was 31 years old, a former Union scout turned land surveyor, and I had been hired by the territorial government to map the canyon systems east of the Mogollon Rim. It was lonely work, honest work, the kind of work that suited a man who had seen too much of other men during the war and needed the quiet of open country to remember who he was. I was not looking for trouble. I was not looking for anything, really. And then I saw her. She was lying face down in the dirt at the bottom of a dry wash, half hidden beneath the shadow of a red rock ledge. At first I thought she was dead. The way she was folded, one arm tucked beneath her, one leg bent at an angle that looked wrong, made my stomach drop. I pulled Cinder to a stop and sat there for a moment, scanning the ridgeline out of old habit. A man who rode into ambushes during the war learned fast that a body in the road was sometimes bait. But nothing moved, no sound except the wind threading through the scrub cedar. I dismounted slowly and walked down into the wash. She was young, 17, maybe 18. Apache by the cut of her clothing, a simple hide dress, worn soft with use, decorated at the hem with small tin cones that caught the light. Her black hair was loose and tangled with dust and dried blood. The blood came from a gash along her left side just below her ribs, not deep enough to have killed her, but deep enough, left untended in this heat, to finish the job slowly. I crouched beside her and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat. Her pulse was there, faint and fast like a bird trapped in a box. I turned her over as gently as I could. Her face was sharp-featured and striking even beneath the dust and the grimace of pain, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, lashes thick against her cheeks. There was a bruise forming along her temple. She had fallen hard or been thrown or struck. I could not yet tell which. I unstopped my canteen. I lifted her head with one hand, tilting her chin up, and I brought the canteen to her cracked lips and let the water come slow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she swallowed. Then she swallowed again. And then her eyes opened. They were dark, so dark the pupil and iris seemed to be the same color, and for a moment they were glassy and unfocused, moving across the sky above her without settling on anything. Then they found my face. She went rigid. The change was sudden and violent. One moment she was limp in my arm, the next she was twisting away from me with a sound that was half gasp and half snarl, scrabbling backward in the dirt, one hand going to her side where the wound was and coming away bloody, her eyes never leaving my face. I sat back on my heels and held up both hands, palms out. "Easy," I said. "I'm not going to hurt you." She said something sharp in Apache. Her voice was low and raw from thirst, but there was iron underneath it. "I don't speak your language," I said, "but I mean you no harm, you understand, no harm." She stared at me. Her back was against the rock ledge now, and she was breathing hard through her nose, measuring me the way a cornered animal measures the distance between itself and the nearest exit. Her hand was still pressed to her side. Fresh blood was seeping between her fingers. "You're bleeding," I said unnecessarily. I reached slowly into my saddlebag and drew out the small medical kit I always carried, a habit from my scouting days, when the nearest surgeon was always 3 days behind the action. I set it on the ground between us and opened it, letting her see the bandaging cloth and the small bottle of carbolic, not reaching for any of it, just letting her look. She looked at the kit, then at me, then at the blood on her hand. Something shifted in her expression, not trust exactly, but a calculation. She said something else, shorter this time, and she did not move away when I picked up the bandaging cloth and moved toward her. I worked as carefully as I could, The wound was a knife cut clean-edged, not a claw or a fall. Someone had put a blade into her deliberately. The thought settled cold in my chest as I cleaned it and bound it tight. She made no sound the entire time. Not one. But I could feel the tension in her, the iron discipline it took to hold still, and I found myself respecting it without quite meaning to. When I was finished, I sat back and offered her the canteen again. She took it this time without hesitation, drank deeply, controlled even in her thirst, stopping before she made herself sick. A girl who knew her own body and its limits. She lowered the canteen and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, in careful and deliberate English that stunned me completely, "You gave me water." "I did," I said. "You gave me water," she said again, slower, as if the words meant something far larger than their surface. "When I was between life and death, you gave me the water from your own vessel." "You needed it," I said. Something moved across her face, something I could not read. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked. "Given water to someone who was thirsty," I said, "which is not something a man needs a reason for." She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the wash. Somewhere high above us a hawk made its tilting circle against the white sky. "Among my people," she said slowly, "there is a law, very old, older than memory." She paused. "If a warrior or a man of any kind gives water to a woman when she stands at the gate of death, he has claimed her breath back for her. Her life belongs to the water he gave." And so she stopped. "So what?" I said. Her dark eyes met mine without flinching. "So by the law of my people," she said, "you are now my husband." The hawk cried once overhead. I stared at her. She stared back at me with absolute, unblinking seriousness. "I beg your pardon," I said. I thought she was delirious. That was my first assumption, the heat, the blood loss, the knock to her head. I had seen men say stranger things after lesser injuries. I had once watched a perfectly sensible sergeant from Ohio insist for 2 hours that he was a lighthouse. So I did not panic. I simply said calmly and reasonably, "You've lost blood and you're dehydrated. You should rest." "I am not confused," she said. "I didn't say you were." "Your face said it." I looked away. She shifted against the rock, adjusting her position with a careful economy of movement that told me the wound hurt considerably more than she was letting on. "My name is Nijoni," she said. "It means beautiful in the Dene tongue, the Navajo. My mother was Navajo. My father was Cheyenne Apache. I was raised in the Apache way." She paused. "I speak English because a missionary woman taught me when I was small, before she died." "I'm sorry," I said. "She was kind," Nijoni said simply. "Kindness has a cost in this country." There was nothing to say to that, so I said nothing. "What is your name?" she asked. "Caleb Holt." She tried it silently, moving her lips around the shape of it. "Caleb," she said. "From the Hebrew, it means faithful or wholehearted." She glanced at me sideways. "The missionary woman also taught me the Bible." "She taught you a great deal," I said. "She taught me everything she knew," Nijoni said. "It was not her fault that what she knew was limited." I almost smiled at that, almost. "Miss Nijoni," I began. "You may call me Nijoni. There is no miss among my people." "Nijoni," I said, "I understand that you have a law, and I respect that, but I am not Apache. The laws of your people don't." "The law does not care what people you are," she said. "The law is about the act. You gave water. The act was done. The law exists because of the act." She looked at me steadily. "You cannot ungive the water, Caleb Holt." I rubbed the back of my neck. The sun was moving. We had maybe 4 hours of hard light left. "What happened to you?" I asked, deciding a change of subject was the wisest strategy available. "Who cut you?" The steadiness in her face shifted, just slightly. "3 men," she said, "white men, riding north from the Gila River. They found me alone near the canyon crossing." She paused. They wanted things I would not give. The cold that had settled in my chest when I first saw the knife wound went several degrees colder. Did they? I started carefully. I fought, she said, simply, finally, closing the door on that question with the single word. I nodded. I did not push. The knife wound? I asked. The smallest one. When I broke away, he caught me across the side. I ran. I fell. She looked down at the bandaging I had wrapped around her middle. I did not think I would get up again. You would have, I said. You're too stubborn not to. She looked at me sharply. Then, to my complete surprise, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the shadow of one. Where is your camp? I asked. Your people how far? The shadow of a smile disappeared. 2 days' ride, she said, east and north, into the canyon country. You can't ride 2 days in this condition. I am aware, she said. Then you'll need to come with me, I said. I have a camp set up half a mile back along the ridge. Clean water, shade. You can rest there until you're strong enough to travel, and then I'll take you back to your people. She studied me for a long moment. You would take me to my people, she said. 2 days east and north, out of your way. I'd take any person with a knife wound back to safety, I said. That's just common decency. Common decency, she repeated, as if the phrase were foreign currency she was not sure she trusted. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my people will want to know who brought me back. Tell them a surveyor who was passing through, I said. I will tell them the truth, she said. I will tell them a man named Caleb Holt gave me water when I was dying, and that by the law of the people he is my husband and he has brought me home. Najoni. The law is the law, she said quietly, not harshly, not as a challenge, just as a fact, the way a person states that the sky is above them and the earth is below. I did not make it, I cannot unmake it, and I would not even if I could, because the law exists to protect women like me in moments like the one you found me in. She met my eyes. You saved my life, Caleb Holt. My people have a word for what that makes you. I did not choose the word, but it is true. I looked at this girl, this composed, steel-spined, quietly extraordinary girl sitting in the dirt of an Arizona wash with a knife wound in her side and someone else's blood drying on her dress, and I had absolutely no idea what to say. So I said the only thing I could. Let's get you to camp, I said. We can argue about the rest later. She nodded once. Yes, she said, we can argue about the rest later. But the way she said it told me she did not expect the argument to go my way. My camp was simple. A canvas lean-to strung between 2 pin-on pines, a fire pit ringed with flat stones, a bedroll, my surveying equipment in its leather cases, and the small iron pot I used for coffee and for heating whatever I managed to shoot or find along the trail. It was not much, but it had shade, and it had the small spring that seeped from the rock face behind the pines, cold and clean even in the high heat of midsummer. Najoni looked at the spring for a long moment when we arrived. Then she went to it and knelt and cupped water in both hands and drank. No ceremony, no hesitation, just a direct and practical relationship with what she needed. I liked that about her, I realized, the directness, the absence of pretense. I helped her to the bedroll and she did not protest, which told me she was hurting more than she showed. I gave her what food I had: dried venison, hardtack, a handful of dried berries I had traded for at the last settlement, and she ate everything without comment and handed the empty cloth back to me. Thank you, she said. Don't mention it. I will mention it, she said. Among my people, gratitude is spoken, not swallowed. Among mine, it's considered drawing attention to a person's misfortune, I said. She considered this. That is a strange way to think about kindness. I suppose it is, I admitted. The afternoon moved slowly toward evening. I worked on my survey maps while she slept, and I found myself glancing over at her more than I should have, checking the rise and fall of her breathing, watching for signs of fever. The wound was clean. The carbolic had done its work. But knife wounds in the desert had a way of turning bad quickly if you weren't careful. She did not develop a fever. What she developed, as the sun went down and the air turned from scorching to merely warm, was a question. "Are you married?" she asked. She had been awake for perhaps 20 minutes, watching the stars appear one by one above the canyon rim. "No," I said. "Were you ever?" I was quiet for a moment. "There was a woman," I said, "before the war. We were engaged to be married." "What happened?" "The war," I said, simply, finally, the same way she had closed the door on her own story earlier. She accepted it the same way I had accepted hers, with a nod and silence and no further pushing. "Do you want to be?" she asked after a while. "Want to be what?" "Married." I set my pencil down on the survey map. "That's a rather direct question." "I told you," she said, "I don't swallow things." I looked at the fire. Flames had a way of making a man honest if he let them. "I don't know," I said at last. "I used to think I did. Before the war I had a whole picture in my head of how my life was going to look. House, land, a woman, children, the whole arrangement." I picked up a small stone and turned it over in my fingers. The war took the picture apart piece by piece, and I haven't been able to put it back together since. So I map things. I learn the shape of land that nobody's named yet. I paused. "I suppose I'm looking for something. I just couldn't tell you what." Nijoni was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother said," she began slowly, "that a man who maps the land is a man who is trying to make the world make sense. Because if you can draw a line around a thing, you can believe it will stay where it is." I stared at her. "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman," I said. "She was," Nijoni said. "She also said that the things that matter most cannot be mapped, because they don't stay where you put them." The fire crackled between us. Above the canyon rim, the stars were coming in thick now, the Milky Way beginning to arch from one edge of the sky to the other the way it only does when you're far enough from any town that the darkness is real darkness. "Tell me about your people," I said. "Not the law, just your people." And she did. She talked for a long time in that low, unhurried voice, about the canyon country her people moved through with the seasons, about the way her grandmother read the weather in the color of rocks, about the smell of pinon smoke and the sound of the round dances, about her father who had been a renowned tracker and her mother who had woven blankets so fine that other women came from 2 days' ride away just to look at them. She talked about the raids, not romanticizing them, not apologizing for them, just describing them the way you describe weather, and about the years of pressure from the territorial government and the soldiers, and about the way her people had learned to move quieter and lighter, like smoke, taking what they needed and leaving less trace than they used to. She talked about what it was to belong to two peoples and feel wholly claimed by neither. She talked, I realized after a while, the way a person talks when they have not had anyone to talk to in a long time. I did not interrupt. I just listened. And the fire burned down slowly, and the stars moved their slow wheel overhead, and somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote sang to the moon, and I sat across from this woman I had known for less than 1 day and felt, for the first time in years, that the picture in my head of how my life was going to look might not be entirely destroyed after all. Just different from what I had imagined. I did not say this, but I thought it. And I had a feeling, from the way she glanced at me once in the long silence that followed her talking, that she thought something similar. "You should sleep," I said finally. "You need it." "So do you," she said. "I'll keep watch." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said quietly and without ceremony, "You are a good man, Caleb Holt." "I'm a fairly ordinary one," I said. "No," she said, "you are not." She closed her eyes. I kept watch. And the night moved over us, slow and enormous and full of stars. I heard them before I saw them. 4 horses, moving fast from the south. I was on my feet and had my rifle in my hands before the sound fully registered, moving to the edge of the tree cover and dropping to one knee behind the largest pinon, eyes on the canyon trail below. 3 riders. White men. And even in the gray pre-dawn light, I could see that the smallest one had a bandage wrapped around his right forearm. My blood went cold and then immediately hot. I heard Nijoni behind me, no sound, just a presence, the way a very still thing makes itself known. She had come awake at the horses too, silently and completely, the way people who have spent their lives in dangerous country learn to do. I turned my head just enough to see her. She was standing behind me, one hand pressed to her bandaged side, her eyes on the riders. Her face was stone. "The same men?" I asked very quietly. "The same," she said. They had not seen us yet. They were following the trail, moving slow now, searching, looking for something they had left unfinished. Everything inside me, that had been a scout for 4 years, woke up at once. "Stay here," I said. "No," she said. "Nijoni." "No," she said again, and there was something in her voice, not defiance, something older and quieter than defiance. Something that said she had spent enough of her life being told to stay behind and wait for what men decided to do with her, and she was done with it. I looked at her for one moment, then I nodded. I moved to the edge of the tree cover where the trail below was clearly visible, and I stood up in plain sight, rifle held across my body, not raised, not threatening but present. A statement. The riders pulled up. "Morning," I called down. The 3 men looked at me, at the rifle, at each other. "Morning," the biggest one called back. He had a red beard and a face like a fist, and the eyes of a man who made a habit of calculating odds. "You camping up there?" "Surveying," I said. "Government work." "See anything come through last night?" He paused deliberately. "An Indian girl, young one, hurt." "Can't say I have," I said. The man with the bandaged arm, the smallest one, shifted in his saddle. His eyes were moving along the tree line. "You sure about that?" Redbeard said. His tone was still conversational, friendly even, which was how I knew he was dangerous. "I'm sure," I said. "I would remember." Silence. The horses moved restlessly. The sky behind the canyon rim was going from gray to pale gold. "You're a long way from anything out here," Redbeard said. "Man alone could get complicated." "Could," I agreed. "But I've found that complications tend to sort themselves out if everybody makes reasonable decisions." Another silence. Then from beside me, slightly behind me and to the left, Nijoni stepped into the open. She stood straight. She had done something to her hair in the few minutes since she had woken, pulled it back, smoothed it, and she held herself with a stillness and a height that made her look, despite the bandaging visible at her side, like she was the one standing on solid ground and everyone else was on uncertain footing. The small man with the bandaged arm made a sound. "There she is," he started. "My wife," I said. The words came out of my mouth before I had fully decided to say them. Silence fell over the canyon like a stone into still water. "Your wife," Redbeard said slowly. "My wife," I said again, steadier now. "We've been camped here 3 days. She took a fall from her horse yesterday, clumsy of her, cut herself on a rock. I patched her up." My voice was level, and my hands were still, and I looked at him the way I had learned to look at men who were deciding whether to call a bluff. "Is there something else I can help you gentlemen with?" The 3 men looked at each other. They looked at me. They looked at the rifle. They looked at Nijoni, who looked back at them with the absolute and complete composure of a woman who has decided she is not afraid and is not going to waste any further energy on the subject. "No," Redbeard said finally, "I reckon not." They rode on. I watched until the sound of their horses had faded completely. Then I waited another 2 minutes, counting the seconds, before I allowed myself to lower the rifle. Najoni had not moved. "My wife," she said. "It was the fastest explanation," I said. "It was," she agreed, a pause, "also the truest." I turned to look at her. She was watching me with those dark, fathomless eyes, and there was something in them now that had not been there yesterday, not triumph, not satisfaction, but something quieter than both. Something that looked, if I was reading it right, almost like hope. "Najoni," I said. "Caleb," she said. "I am not Apache." "No," she said. "I don't know your law." "You are learning it," she said. "I can't just," I stopped, started again. "A man can't become a husband in a day." "No," she agreed. "He cannot." She looked at me steadily. "But a man can choose to become one, slowly, honestly, in the way that lasts." She tilted her head slightly. "You called me your wife to protect me. You kept watch all night so I could sleep. You cleaned my wound and fed me and listened to me talk until the fire burned out." She paused. "Tell me, Caleb Holt, what part of that is so far from what you already are?" The morning light was coming fully now, gold and clean over the canyon rim, and it caught the tin cones at the hem of her dress and threw 100 small lights across the ground between us. I had no answer for her, which was, I suspected, as close to an answer as she needed. 2 days east and north," I said finally. 2 days, she confirmed. "To your people." "To our people," she said quietly, and she did not look away. I picked up my rifle and turned back toward camp to begin packing. And I was smiling. Not the shadow of one. The full thing.